uh, excuse me. It means a lot to me as someone who's very invested in Jewish community that everyone here is saying, yes, I want to be in this moment in the Jewish calendar, and recognizing that it can be that there can be really tough moments too. So I just want to affirm that and say thank you to everyone. And then I'll just conclude with a blessing that we say, thanking God as the creator of all good things. So we say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hatov v'hametiv, and I'll add lakol, meaning blessed are you, ineffable one, ruler of all, who does good and creates good. And we usually say this at a time of communal goodness. And that's what I think this gathering is. So I'll turn it back over to you, Rebecca.
Beautiful. Amen.
Mm.
Um, so I'm going to introduce myself very, very briefly. I'm Rebecca Staplewax. I'm the executive director at Sojourn, the Southern Jewish Resource Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity. Sojourn empowers, it celebrates, it educates, and it advocates for LGBTQ plus people across the South, and with a Jewish foundation and heart. And so we're very pleased to have Pathways to Progress. This is our fifth out of a sixth series this year. And it's a speaker series, and it's also a wonderful discussion and learning from one another as well as our panelists. So I'm very excited to share your wisdom and learn from each other. Carly, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself? And in addition to just all the demographics, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you do during this season for your own mental health.
Hmm. Thank you. And thank you for blessing Rabbi Salem. So beautiful. My name is Carly Coons. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a licensed social worker. I'm the director of education and programming at the Blue Dove Foundation, where we focus on mental health education through a Jewish lens, thinking about how can we bring together our Jewish traditions, texts, holidays, and connect that to mental health and wellness, to validate that we should be caring for our mental health no matter where we are, but especially in our Jewish spaces. And I am located in Denver, Colorado, and am a proud LGBTQ ally. And it is a really great question of how to care for myself during the holidays. I want to own that I am still very much a learner in what that looks like. And sometimes I am great at it, and sometimes I struggle with it. What I am doing for myself this year is really focusing on balance and thinking about what are the things I know I can do. And when I feel like I'm hitting a breaking point, what are the things, how can I tap out and take care of myself? Whether it's as small as standing outside in the sun for 5 minutes, or calling a friend, or taking a nap, but knowing what my things are so that when I hit my breaking point, I can take a break and do something to rejuvenate myself. So we'll see if it's as successful as I hope, but that's what I'm aiming for this season.
It's great. You have some go-tos for the times that you need them, and knowing those ahead of time, being proactive is essential. How about
Mm-hmm.
you, Rabbi Salem?
Yeah, I love this question. So just to, hi, Rabbi Salem. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Institute of Southern Jewish Life, which is based in Jackson, Mississippi, where I am right now, and where I live. And yeah, for me, um, uh, prioritizing my mental health on the high holidays is all about preparation. And I will talk more about what that could mean for lay people. I'll just say for me as a rabbi, I'm usually working all of the holidays. And so this time right now in particular, is the month of Elul, which is the month before the high holidays begin. And it's known in our tradition as a time of introspection, of sort of like self-awareness and self-accountability. And so for me, this time is really key in getting to the high holidays, because I'll be working and I won't necessarily be among people I know very well. And I'm not sure exactly what kind of experience I personally will be able to have. So I do a lot of work before the high holidays. And part of what I will talk about later today is how some of you who maybe are attending services or with family can do some preparation to prioritize your own mental health.
I just want to make a plug for a group that Sojourn is starting for queer people working in Jewish spaces. I think that it's not specifically about the holidays, but it is absolutely time for folks to come together with a common understanding and a support for one another. So that will be happening in November. Everybody will learn about it more as the months go by. But since Jewish holidays can often be hopefully times of joy, there are definitely more solemn ones, especially at the high holidays. But they also can be stressful and challenging for people who are marginalized. So if you were to choose some strategies, Carly, we'll start with you about or practices that you have found helpful in making suggestions to folks. What would you suggest?
Hmm. It's such a beautiful question. And I think, especially in light of this last year, something that I think the Jewish community has been thinking about a lot. How do we, what do we do? How do we be in community with each other? And I think one of the things that I keep coming back to is this idea of connectedness. And especially in light of sort of this crisis we've been facing around loneliness and isolation, something that the Surgeon General talked about in May of last year, May 2023, that we have this public health crisis of not being connected to each other, which probably has a lot of contributing factors. So as we are approaching the holidays, I think thinking about what does that connectedness mean for us? If we are joining in person for holiday celebrations, whether they're meals or services, how can you find a group of people who you feel like you can truly be yourself with? And if you're joining virtually because that works better for you, thinking about how can you engage in a way that makes you feel like you're fully participating. And I also think, knowing what that balance is for yourself, between really engaging and then taking some time to do your own New Year's reflecting, your own New Year's commitments to yourself, and thinking about what does that look like, and also celebrating the year that you've had, and the great successes that you've had, and the joy that you've seen in your last year. So I think if you can do that with others, if you're more of an introspective person and you want to do that on your own, thinking about what that looks like for you. So connectedness would be the word I'm thinking about.
And Rabbi Salem, do you find that you have to guide people during this time
Yeah.
and support themselves?
I want to just like echo everything Carly said, because yes to all of that. And I'll just a few specifics. One is that if you're going to services, you can try to find out ahead of time. It's not very hard, like what prayer book is going to be used, and kind of check it out a little bit. And if you like it, great. Know that there's, like most of the sort of prayer books that probably people on this call and folks who will be watching will be going to are progressive, right? Have some concept of egalitarianism and all of that. However, that may not be universally true. And so a lot of the sort of prayer books that most communities that I know use like have great readings. So you can choose like to sort of pause, pay attention to some of the footnotes or the side readings, or a page that maybe is not being highlighted. You can read whatever you want. And then if you do discover that, like it maybe the prayer book that that your, maybe your parents' synagogue uses is very old fashioned, bring your own. There are incredible Machzorim, which is the High Holiday prayer book out there, that have like inclusive God language, that have readings from queer folks and from other marginalized folks. And, you don't have to read what is given to you. And so on that note, also, you could bring another book. I would bring something like that's respectful, maybe not, I don't want to say what it shouldn't be, but something that's like maybe keeping in the spirit of the day. But you could read something else as well, either a book on the topic of the high holidays, or there's lots of other books. So there's lots of ways to sort of make the situation, and you can be in community and also be getting what you need. So I would say that sort of a preparation, figuring out the prayer book situation and whether you need to bring your own, or just know you can stop anywhere in the prayer book and focus on a reading or a thought that really sticks out to you. And the other thing I would say on this theme of connectedness is actually to sort of like have a friend that you can say like, hey, if things get rough for me, can I text you, or can you be available for a phone call? And just like step out, like there are some maybe some communities where like using your phone maybe in the synagogue is not appropriate, but you can just, walk outside. These services are often a little longer on the high holidays, and you can just walk outside, text someone, call someone, and just say like, hey, I just had a moment, or my, like a family member gave me a dirty look while, or something, whatever it is, or I just was like feeling really lonely all of a sudden, and I just needed to talk to someone who I knew has my back. So again, that's the preparation part, making sure you have someone, or if you have someone in the synagogue and you can just sort of like give them the high sign, like, hey, like, let's go outside and chat for a moment. I need a moment. I need a hug. I need someone to look at me and say, you, as you are a child of God and worthy of all the love in this world. So I'll stop there for now.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, that eye contact, that password that some of us need sometimes. I have been in this field work for almost 20 years, and I have certainly seen Jewish communities evolve. I mean, in tremendous ways. I am curious, Rabbi Salem, how you see Jewish communities, especially in the South, in their response to queer people. I know that you work in very small communities,
Yeah.
and also in good ways and in maybe some informative ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, a couple trends that I have noticed in my very small communities in the South is that there are those communities tend to have a higher than average makeup of people who have converted. Mainly from Christianity because of issues of queerness. And they see the Jewish community, and I think this is lovely, although I know it doesn't reflect, the gadol, the big picture, but they see the Jewish community as as being a friendly place for queer folks, which I think is just like so wonderful. And it's true that in, like the non-Orthodox spaces, right? We don't see the sort of like, inveighing against queer folks that you might see in sort of mainline Protestant spaces especially in the Deep South. So people do see it as, like a safer space, which is not to say that all Jewish communities do it, do inclusion and have, and do that well. But I have noticed that trend. So I would say like, find your people, because they are there. And then I'll also say, like, I think there is an awareness that, that some of the themes of the high holidays, and I was just reviewing really quickly before I got on, like, so let's say some of the traditional Torah and Haftarah readings, which are very like heterocentric. They're mostly about, about a couple, and they're a lot about fertility journeys, and they're about like kids having a hard time. And so I think there is both a realization that, especially when we're talking about people having kids, like that may not be the lived reality for queer folks, or they, like it may be exactly where people are, because of course fertility is a different notion when we're talking about straight folks versus queer folks. But it also might bring up a lot of pain as well. And then there's the issue of the sort of like kids being sort of mistreated. We see that with Abraham mistreating Ishmael, with Abraham mistreating Isaac. And so I think there can be some resonances there with how some of us have experienced our families of origin. And I think there is an awareness that like some of these stories, they're not universal necessarily, and they're not going to be giving truth to everyone in the same way. So I see some real hope. And when I look at the ways in which our communities are doing a much better job of more thoughtfully presenting more of the traditional stories that we hear, and sort of saying like, hey, this might be hard, this might be painful for this reason, and sort of acknowledging like, okay, we may be able to all find some truth, but that may be hard fought. And it's okay if you're feeling like, yeah, this story right now for me is not where I am. So yeah.
I think those trigger warnings are really acknowledging that, like, this is not your everyday kind of story, that and you hope very much that this will not ever happen for real. So that is really very, I would say, just sensitive, just being sensitive. For you, Carly, you work in many Jewish spaces, and I'm curious how you have seen Jewish spaces respond to queer folks.
Yeah, I think, sort of to echo some of what Rabbi Salem shared, is being upfront with it, sharing what is it about your Jewish space that is inclusive? What is it about your space that makes it safe for people to enter as they are, as their true and full selves? And I think especially knowing that the LGBTQ community struggles with mental health, has higher rates of mental illness or of suicidal ideation, because of social isolation, because of all of these different factors. I think it's really the responsibility of our organizations to make sure that we are expressing how is it that we're supporting people. I think one of the most powerful things that organizations can do, whether it's a synagogue or a JCC, right, wherever you are, is to have resources available that people can take on their own. So if it's having information about a crisis line in the bathroom, having cards in the bathroom that somebody can take without having to ask for it, having it on the stall of a bathroom, right? Having that so that people know that this is a space where we talk about these things. And if and when you need support, these are resources that we trust. I think it also indicates then to people that if you are struggling, right, if you are in services and you're having a hard time, something is not sitting well with you, that perhaps there is somebody on staff or who's a lay leader who you can touch base with and say, this didn't feel great to me today. Or I just personally am having a really challenging day. It might be somebody you don't know, so perhaps you're not comfortable doing that, and that's okay. So knowing who are your people who you can reach out to. And also, I think, as we're reimagining what some of our traditions look like, giving ourselves permission to say, I know this is what traditionally Judaism has done, but I think this new tradition works better for me. And who are the people I can share that with so that we're building this new tradition together, whether it's a community of LGBTQ folks at your congregation, or it's your own community outside of the congregation, whatever that looks like. I think that's such a beautiful way to start the new year, but also to reclaim something that perhaps didn't feel like it was yours.
That is the incredible thing about our tradition, is that it has evolved over time, and there's just such beauty in it, and the creations that we continue to make. Rabbi Salem, you mentioned some of the texts that we often are that we're learning again and again every year. That's not so easy and to hear. I am curious if you have suggestions on texts that folks do. You had mentioned before about, you can look in the Machzorim and see that there's other sort of supplements in there. But and it could be that prayer book, or I'm thinking of just the values in which we infuse all the time that that really fortify us as people.
Yeah. I also just want to bring, before I kind of get into that, just want to bring one story, one sort of like noticing that I've had. So, for a very long time, I guess, since the rabbis sort of instituted the Yom Kippur ritual in particular, we have read on Yom Kippur afternoon a section of the book of Leviticus that includes a verse that has been, in the last sort of like, let's say 100 years, maybe longer, been used to intentionally marginalize and oppress queer folks. And it's it's the verse from Leviticus 18, man shall not lie with another man, blah, blah, blah. And I just want to note that whatever you are reading on Yom Kippur afternoon, if it's not that, that does represent a huge step forward, because many, many synagogues have decided, you know what, we're just not doing that anymore. We're not giving this verse that has been weaponized against queer folks any more any more airtime on this holiest day of the year. Now, I think there are lots of ways, and if you are going to a synagogue that still does read it, I know there are really, really thoughtful ways of maintaining tradition, and while also saying we do not affirm this verse being used against queer folks. But I just want to point out that, like, whatever you're reading, if you're not reading that, that does represent a huge shift, because it is not easy in Jewish tradition to sort of like pry some of the traditional liturgy like loose, and to sort of change it whole cloth. So I just want to notice that. And people sometimes read different things from the book of Leviticus, sort of a different holiness code that talks more about like our obligations to one another and sort of not sexual ethics, but ethics in general, which I think is a really nice move that sort of, keeps the intent of the tradition, but moves it into sort of the ethical, more general ethical sphere. Yeah, and just sort of going back, we are so blessed to live in an era where we do have voices of queer Jewish scholars that have weighed in on, Torah in lots of different ways. So I'm thinking of like Torah Queries, which is an anthology written by queer folks that goes through the weekly parsha, and of course everything we read on the high holidays is in there. So you could read something like that, or like I would say any of your favorite voices that really speak to where you are is a good thing to bring. And I'm a big fan of encouraging people to bring their own reading material if you want to. It's such a key thing. So, and I just want to highlight, we did in the chat, we've had notes about all gender bathrooms, which are so important. And if you are involved at all in your shul and you don't have them, it's a great time to sort of like lobby for that to happen at least on the high holidays, to just mark one bathroom or something as that. Yeah, so I want to.
Great. We'll be sending out the recording, so we'll make sure that anybody who has to go will get that, and thrilled that you're here. And yes, Torah Queries was written by, or one of the editors by Rabbi Joshua Lesser, who is Sojourn founder. I wanted to ask you, Carly, I know you have lots of resources, and I'd love you at some point to put them in the chat so that folks can access them. But I'm curious if there's anything in particular you want to highlight.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we do at the Blue Dove Foundation is we create resources, which I like to explain as like activity-based learning. So we take some Jewish concept, tie it to some mental health concept with an activity to help us really think about how we want to apply that to our lives, or to think about it more deeply. And we often connect them to Jewish holidays because it's an easy starting point, right? We're familiar with the calendar, we know when things are happening, and we know some of those themes. And so we dive into them a little bit more. And we have a whole slate, and I'll put it in the chat in a moment. We have a whole slate of high holiday resources that are so beautiful because you can do them on your own. You can also bring them to your holiday meals. My family always expects me to show up now with some sort of mental health activity for us to engage in. And it's been really powerful, especially for some of the members of my family who have never spoken about mental health before or hadn't really thought about it until recent years. So I'll put those in the chat. And I think, the other activity that I love, we do a workshop where we focus on the Misha Berach, which is a prayer for healing, and really think about, why do we say this prayer? When do we say this prayer? And then we write our own Misha Berachs, our own prayers for healing. And I think this can be such a beautiful activity because what we need healing for changes throughout the year, year to year. And I think this can be a really beautiful thing as you're entering the high holidays, is to think about what is the healing I need as I enter this year? Or you can write it with family or friends and say, what's the healing we hope for each other? And if you write one and you want to share it with us, we would love to share it out with the community. But I think that can be a really nice way to have your voice as a part of the liturgy, right? As a part of Jewish text, by creating your own prayers for what it is that you need, because chances are, if you're seeking it, there's somebody else who's seeking that too.
again, like these are things that just didn't cross anyone's mind, 40 years ago when somebody was getting bat mitzvah, at all. So I love it. There, questions about um, like synagogues and organizations that just about mental health, not just about queer people. Like mental health wasn't talked about until fairly recently too, and people have been in crisis forever, and people have been queer forever. And I am very curious how Jewish communities are supporting mental health these days. And well, let's start with you, Rabbi Salem.
Yeah. I think it's still not talked about enough. I mean, I want to see, I don't know that there may be other rabbis and cantors on this call, but I'll just say it, really want to challenge my colleagues to speak out more about it, because it does help everyone, because as you as you mentioned, Rebecca, like mental health issues affect everyone. And we all either have experienced or will experience some kind of crisis in our lives. And I think it's so important for the people who are leading services, and it may not be rabbis and cantors, it may just be lay leaders, but whoever is up there has a tremendous opportunity to sort of bring it up and I don't think we are enough. And I think the high holidays, we have, that is a time when lots of people come in the door, of our communities that might not be there at other times. And so I think it is actually a really great place to say, like, this is something that our tradition cares about. This is not, it's not a new issue. And like our rabbis, they didn't have the language that we do now, but they certainly understood in various ways, how people can struggle. And so I think it's important for people who are in a position to be able to talk about it. And I also do think there is more of an understanding, especially let's say like on these days themselves, that sometimes these days are long. And so I think there is a little bit more understanding of like people might need to get up and, walk around, or, like do what they need to do for their bodies, or for their minds or their souls. And that like there's a little bit less of an expectation these days that people just sit and don't move and all of that. And so I think it is a good thing that people understand, that there's some understanding that, like the kahal, the congregation, has a little bit more freedom in most congregations to sort of do what they need to do. And I'll just say one last thing is that, like, if you are in a position to be on the bima and be welcoming people, saying explicitly, like, if you need to get up, if you need to take a break, if you need to, XYZ, you need to just not sing, but just listen, or, not listen, but read, just normalizing the different things is a really powerful thing.
And Carly, you have been, this is what you do. And so how do Jewish communities respond to talking about mental health?
Yeah, talking about mental health is one of the most important things that we can do to reduce and eliminate stigma. When we talk about mental illness and addiction, what we're doing is signaling is that it's okay to talk about it, which means it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to offer help. When we don't talk about things, it doesn't invite us to share. And I think, especially as we are showing up as individuals to Jewish spaces, as we are leading Jewish spaces, showing up authentically. Um, I'll share that a couple of weeks ago, I play guitar, I song lead for small little humans, Jewish humans. And I was playing some music and I was just having a rough day. I didn't feel great. It was impacted physically, so it was impacting my mental health. And I could not keep the guitar chords straight. And I just decided, instead of just pushing through, that I would just pause and say, have you ever had a hard day? Have you ever thought you really knew what you were doing and then you get up there and you forget how to do it? Can we start over? I'll tell you, none of the 2-year-olds cared. They were like, whatever, let's start over. But afterward, I had a parent come up to me and say, I've never had somebody who was leading something say, hey, I need to pause and start over. And he was like, that gave me the permission that I think I really needed this week to try again. I was having a tough mental health day. I was having a tough physical day. And I was able to use that as a role modeling for what that could look like for somebody else when they're having a tough day. Now, we're not always in the position to be able to pause in front of people and say, I need to start over. But I think thinking about what does that look like for you? How can you let people know how you're really feeling? It gives other people the permission to say, it's okay if I'm struggling, if I'm having a hard day. It reduces that stigma so greatly. And it creates opportunities for people to learn and want to say, how do I support people when they're struggling? What do I do if there's a crisis? What do I do if I see somebody overdose? What are the tools that I could use? So as we talk about it more and more, we create an environment where people can share and people can show up as they truly are.
So beautiful in that, it only takes being yourself to really move the needle. Um, I think that because we're such a traditional religion, and we get infused with so much at a young age, that when there is estrangement, that can be incredibly difficult, especially at the holidays. So I was really curious as to, is there anything in our Jewish texts or in conversations that you all have had, about what Judaism says about estrangement? Rabbi Salem, how about you?
Yeah,
Start with that.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about one story that that sometimes shows up in some communities during the high holidays. And it's a very painful one, but there is a little bit of hope in it as well. And that's the story of Sarah wanting a child, being in a position to give her, concubine or maid servant to her husband, which, is of course abhorrent. We're talking about, someone who did not have the consent to be able to say yes or no. And then this maidservant Hagar has a child with Sarah's husband Abraham, and then Sarah gets upset, and in continuing her sort of like using her power to abuse another human being, tells Abraham, "You have to banish her and her child." That's important. So, it is a very painful story, certainly for anyone who has experienced, lack of consent in relationship, as well as anyone who feels marginalized in the Jewish community, because part of why Hagar is able to be passed around, in this way is that she is a foreigner. And when she and her child are in the desert, she is desperate. And we do get this wonderful response from God/an angel of God. So we have this story, while overall very problematic, but also one of God being someone who sees the marginalized, sees someone in pain and responds, and says, it is going to be okay, and speaks directly to this marginalized person and says, your child is going to be okay, and you are going to be okay, and he is going to grow up and have a happy life. So, you know, like in a painful context, there is this moment of Hashem, of Adonai, of our God, being someone who sees pain and sees estrangement and sees suffering and says it's going to be okay, and recognizes that. So that's one example from High Holidays. And I'll just say one more thing, which is that, you know, there is this is a time when we are focusing on what is called teshuvah, repentance in our tradition, in which we are, you know, supposed to be making amends, sort of like seeing where we have failed God, others, and ourselves, and trying to figure out how we can do better. But there is a real, you know, and I think that internal work is wonderful. There's also an understanding in Jewish tradition that we do not owe forgiveness to anyone. And so I'm thinking about places where, you know, like we felt estranged because perhaps we have been wronged in some way, either by community, by family, by someone. It is okay to, the onus is not on us to forgive. The onus is on others to make amends, to ask forgiveness. But we don't have to. And I mean, I would say, like, for our mental health, you know, of course, like, holding on to anger, holding on, you know, really only hurts ourselves, but we can figure out a way to be okay with hurt that has been done to us without necessarily forgiving. And I just want to, like, hold that out as a moment that I think offers us dignity, offers us autonomy in a place where we might have been hurt or marginalized. We can sort of own our own timeline, and that Jewish tradition does not force forgiveness on us. So,
Also very powerful. Amazing. Carly, would you like to add anything? And I'm going to also ask anybody who's with us, if they have questions, they're welcome to put them in the chat. After you're done, Carly, we'll see if anybody wants to come off mute and ask some questions too.
Thank you. I think I really love what you just said, Rabbi Salem, right? That we don't owe anybody forgiveness, but also this idea that we talk a lot about, that it's okay to not be okay. I think especially as we are struggling, and we are a people who struggle, right? That is one of the core things we are built on as Jewish people. Is that, you know, often our society makes us feel like, you know, we have to be strong and independent. We need to be successful. We need to be happy. And the reality is that life is really hard, and that we do really struggle. And even if we are not ourselves diagnosed with a mental illness, it doesn't mean that we're struggling with our mental health, right? We can have great mental health days. We can have really tough mental health days. And I think this permission for us to be as we are on whatever day it is so important. I also think that a lot of people who do struggle with mental illness or addiction can really feel estranged from their community. It might not fit into their family of origin. They might no longer feel connected to the Jewish community in the way that they used to feel connected. And especially with everything that has happened in the last year, with the increase in anti-Semitism, the wars in the Middle East, I think there is a lot of estrangement and a lot of different feelings about how do I still connect to this community? Am I still welcome in this space as I am? Are my opinions welcome in this space? And I think kind of coming back to that idea of, like, it's okay to not be okay, thinking about how can you show up even if you're feeling uncertain? Who are those people who you can connect to when it feels hard? Or what are the things that you can do, right? if you write on holidays or on, holy days, could you bring a piece of paper and a pen and jot down your thoughts as you are in services or as you are watching services? If you're watching from home, if you're engaging from home, can you do some sort of activity, right? Can you watch while you're on a walk? Can you do an art project while you're watching, right? Something that allows you to reconnect back to yourself, to feel your body physically, reconnect the mental and the physical parts of your body, so that you're sort of living as a whole being in that way.
Love that. Appreciate that so much. We have a really important question in the chat, and so you don't have to forgive, but what if you want to forgive and that person has already passed away? And especially if it's in relation to estrangement and mental health struggles. And I am going to toss it to either one of you.
It is such a good question. And I think something that is really hard is how do you be in relationship with someone who has passed away or who you no longer have a relationship with, who, even if they still are alive, you don't have that ability to reach out to them, because that can look like a lot of different things. I think the first is understanding that grief looks really different for everyone. And especially when we come to holidays or birthday celebrations, right? Times of year that hold a lot of meaning for us. We can sometimes experience those feelings of grief even a little bit more acutely than at other times of the year. So I think, one, giving yourself permission to say it's okay that I'm struggling. It's okay that I'm wanting to ask for or to give forgiveness to someone I can't have that connection with anymore. And, perhaps finding a way to physically represent that, whether it's writing a letter or, taking a balloon and writing a message and sending it up, whatever that might look like for you. But finding a way to, I always think it's so helpful when we can actively do something that helps us express the emotions that we're feeling. So again, for some people, that's art. For some people, it's reading. For some people, it's writing. It's just being out in nature. So finding the thing that helps you feel really connected. Again, part of it's hard because we don't know if they'll hear it. We don't know if they'll accept it or they'll give it, right? There's so much unknown. But I think doing something for you that allows you to feel grounded in that decision to ask for forgiveness or to grant forgiveness when you won't be able to hear that answer back can be really helpful. Rabbi Salem, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that yes, technically, like if someone has passed away in Jewish tradition, you technically can't forgive them. Because they're not in a place where they're asking for that forgiveness. However, there is a lot of work, and you mentioned that. You mentioned so many good strategies, Carly, about how to do the work so that you are not stuck wherever that is, because there is a lot that you can do to come to terms with. One of my favorite, this is not actually Jewish wisdom, but just something I think my therapist told me once, is that forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. And so in that sense, sort of like being able to sort of say, like, this person who is no longer in my life, whether because they passed away or, as you really astutely point out, Carly, just might not be in our lives anymore. Like being able to be clear on, what they did and how it hurt, and the effects that it had, can really go such a long way in being able to release what is often anger and hurt, which are two sides of the same coin, at what has happened. And in that way, maybe that does get you to forgiveness, or maybe it just gets you to a more sort of like solid starting point to be able to build and move on. Because, and yeah, and just to note, just I so appreciate your saying grief looks differently for so many people. It is just, it's so hard to be you know, still wrestling with hurt from someone that you can't, for whatever reason, have that closure with. And I just want to acknowledge that. And, you know, like I think so many of us have struggled, continue to struggle with that. Yeah.
Thank you both. That's I think a lot of us struggle with that, and that in the practice that I have at working with people with HIV, sometimes it's someone who has infected them, and that can it's just so complicated, and there's so many layers, and I also I'm really curious about what you said, Rabbi Salem, about I had never known about Jewish tradition saying that you really can't forgive somebody who's passed. And I also say we have no idea what's beyond, and that we can really make anything up, and that and in that making up we can figure out what would it feel like to forgive this person, what imagining and really manifesting that.
Yeah, I think I really want to echo that, because I think, you know, like creating a script, you know, and knowing, being very clear on what you would like to have heard, and sort of then like, and like, having a situation in which you, sort of sit with like, okay, what if this person had said to me exactly what I needed, and how would that feel? And is there a way in which I can make that my reality, you know, in order to move? I think that is like, you know, I think it's so important. Yeah.
To add on to that too, something I think about all the time, that I think the hardest things about unknowns is that we are meaning makers. People by nature, we are looking for meaning in whatever way that resonates for us. And so it is hard when there's an unknown, because it's hard to grasp onto what that meaning is. So I love that suggestion of thinking about what could this conversation have looked like, or what would this conversation look like if this happened again in the future? Or what are the things you wish you had got from that person that you can start seeking in your future relationships with others, so that we can somehow, in a world of a lot of unknowns, in a world of a lot of lack of control, we can hold on to some sort of meaning.
Well, the hour has sped by, and amazing and so wonderful. I'm wondering if there's anybody else that has a question. Certainly ask. And if that is not coming up for us, I am curious, Rabbi Salem and Carly, if there's any last thoughts that we haven't shared yet that you would like to.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that, you know, that my hope for everyone here is that our holidays are that you can find joy and connection and opportunities for growth and light and all of these things. They I mean, both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur kind of set up to be, you know, like intense experiences, but ones that I think ultimately fuel our own growth. And so that's what I would hope for everyone, is even in just the smallest bit, is that, you know, if you can find a moment, a connection with a person, with you know, a piece of text, with a prayer, with the silence, with whatever it is that that you that it is ultimately a growthful and hopeful experience, because Yeah, the world is really hard right now. And so yeah, that's what I would hope for all of us. And if you go in with just like, okay, it's like slightly lowered expectations, what I hope is just like one moment where I can kind of hold on to, probably you're gonna find it.
I want to echo that same thing, right? Giving ourselves permission to show up as we are. And that might mean a shifting of expectations or just a broadening of expectations for ourselves and others. Um, it makes me think of a prayer for healing that was written in one of our workshops. Amisha Barak first celebrated connection, and I would love to share it with you all. I think it is just so on point with what we're talking about. May we all celebrate our connection through Judaism and treat each other as family. Let us love and support each other in all of life's experiences, good and bad. May we all focus on healing the world through loving kindness and each other. And may we be patient with others and ourselves and focus on being the best version of ourselves. I hope that is what your holiday season brings for you and what you can bring for others.
What a stunning and just appropriate, fabulous way to end. Thank you both, Carly and Rabbi Salem. I also want to thank the Bremen Foundation for supporting Pathways to Progress, and especially this mental health conversation. Grateful for our time together, and that May 5785 be a peaceful, loving, healthy time for all.
Amen. May it be so.
Amen. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Bye, everyone.